Hey everybody, thanks for hopping on. We've got our panelists here. We'll get started in just a minute or so. We'll just wait for people to trickle in here. So surprise question for the panelists while we wait. What is the highlight of your weeks so far? Start with Jonas.
Ooh, that's a good one. Actually, yes, I just ordered, so we used to have like the La Colombe draft lattes at the office. And we would just constantly go through those. And I recently found out you could order them in bulk on Amazon. So it's been awesome.
Wait, do those come in a can, or are these the ones I'm thinking of? Or okay.
Yeah, a can with like the weird like sip lid. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Maybe we can get leadership to expense those for us now that we're all working from home. Cool. What about you, Lisa?
For my birthday, I bought myself a froyo machine and Dole Whip mix to bring a little bit of Disneyland in my life.
Oh my gosh, what was the second thing?
Dole Whip mix, so like the pineapple froyo flavor.
Oh, I'm excited about this. I might need to get a froyo machine. I might have to get your recommendation after. It's just Amazon or what? That's where stuff is.
Yeah, just Amazon.
Nice.
I think it's
great. Wow. Okay, I'm gonna order both of these things. Megan, what about you? What was your highlight?
I think yesterday was probably the highlight. I just spent the whole day outside now that the smoke has cleared in San Francisco. So went on a long walk to the Golden Gate Bridge, and then I hung out at the park for a couple hours, and then I went back to the park with some friends last night. So I got my share of fresh air.
Awesome. Okay, so less so retail therapy and more just like nature, fresh air therapy, which I support that one as well.
Yesterday at least, but.
All right, let's go ahead. We're about 2 minutes past, so if we have any latecomers, we'll let them straggle in, but we'll go ahead and get started here. Guys, thanks for joining us for our first Enablement Career Panel with WorkRamp. This webinar will be recorded, so don't worry about taking too many copious notes. We will send you a copy of the recording and the deck in the next 24 hours here. And for those of you who don't know me and are joining our webinar for the first time, WorkRamp is the leading enterprise learning platform for educating employees and customers at scale. Our corporate training platform powers learning for top companies like Zoom, which we're using for this webinar, as well as Intercom, Algolia, and Branch. And so we've got some representatives from each of those companies today that I'll introduce in a second. I'm Danielle Scott. I'm the Director of Sales here at WorkRamp, just so you know a little bit about me and what I do. And in terms of panelists, today we're joined by 3 enablement pros. So we've got Megan Hunting, who's over at Intercom, Lisa Thompson at Branch, and Jonas Taylor at Algolia. And they all have really interesting backgrounds moving into enablement. So we've got a good diverse mix here. Megan runs sales training and enablement and transitioned from an AE role. Lisa runs enablement program management and transitioned from support. And Jonas runs revenue enablement and actually transitioned from an enterprise SDR role. So really excited to hear about their various backgrounds today and the programs they put together there. In terms of agenda, we'll go ahead and first discuss their career journeys from revenue roles to enablement, and then talk about how these rising stars kind of carved out their own roles and how they're measuring ROI for their programs. And finally, we'll go through kind of their challenges, highlights, and overall learnings in enablement at Algolia, Branch, and Intercom. And so I'm ready to go ahead and get started if you guys are. For the first section, let's go ahead and talk through panelist intros and your kind of career journeys from your various go-to-market roles into enablement. Maybe Jonas, if you could share a little bit of background first.
Yeah, absolutely. So hello, everyone. I'm Jonas. I do revenue enablement at Algolia. I work on a team with 2 other amazing enablement professionals, actually 3, and it has been a blast so far. So I started at Algolia about 2.5 years ago. I was an inbound SDR, so I was a lead routing, lead follow-up machine, moved into an outbound enterprise biz dev role. And you know, you get to that point, kind of the fork in the path, right, of where you want to go next in your career. And I was torn between going to a closing role, so becoming an account executive and doing full cycle sales, or did I want to continue to do really what I was already doing as a BDR. I got to work, you know, at the time directly under the worldwide director of biz dev. And so I got to onboard a lot of SDRs, onboard a lot of BDRs, and quickly learned that like, I'm okay at this. I really like this. I like leading sessions, and seeing the team succeed was a lot more fun than just seeing myself succeed. And that was kind of what teed me up to enablement. And here we are now.
Awesome. Thanks for the intro. Megan, what about you?
Sure. I started at Intercom almost 4 years ago. I joined initially as an SDR and was on that team for about 6 months, and then joined our small business account executive team. And I was on that team for a little over 2 years. And at that point, I think I realized that while I did like sales and, you know, I was good at it, it wasn't where I wanted to be long term. So at the time, we happened to bring in for the first time a director of sales enablement and training, and he was really keen to get a sales rep that was currently at Intercom over to his team to help onboard and train all of our reps, and it was just a perfect fit. So I've been on the sales enablement team now for a little over a year.
Awesome. Cool. What about you, Lisa?
For me, I have a background of working in support for many years. And as I was like in support, I kind of always picked up these enablement projects. And so I naturally kind of just progressed into just taking on a full-time role everywhere that I moved. So I moved from support into sales ops, and then there was a huge need for enablement there. So I just started really carving out the career for myself in enablement. And then I moved over to branch, and at branch, there was this huge need for filling a lot of the gaps that they had like organizationally with different initiatives that were in play, and just having that singular view and creating a full infrastructure. So I was like, oh, I've done little bits of all of this. So I just dove in, and that's where I've been at for a little bit over a year.
Awesome. Love that kind of background there. It's great because you guys came from 3 kind of different roles in the business, all customer facing roles, right? But it seems like there's this common theme of all of you guys were kind of realizing that you had this ability and this desire to kind of help and train other people at the same time when the businesses were kind of needing to start doing that at scale. So, and for background on WorkRamp, I'll just give a little sidebar here. I kind of run enablement for the sales team today. We're small enough, and fortunately we're equipped enough with our own awesome enablement training platform that a director can run enablement with the help of marketing, with the help of our SE team. But you know, eventually I'm sure we're excited to ask you a ton of questions today to learn about how I can kind of better the program in the meantime. And by the way, if you're in the audience and have questions, feel free to chat in. And we can get to those live as we go through. The first kind of question for you all is, what do you support rep who would do really well kind of making that transition into an enablement team? And maybe we can start with Megan here.
Sure. So I think part of what made me successful as an account executive was not necessarily that I was like the best sales rep by any means. I think I was successful because I'm super organized and very process oriented. And that is something that made me a really great fit for enablement and really drew me to the role. And also too, what initially drew me to sales was that I love meeting people. I love building relationships and talking to people every day. But I realized that I didn't want to do that with external people outside of Intercom, like prospects and customers. I wanted to really focus on those internal relationships with my teammates and with our sales leadership. So it was a perfect fit in that sense. So yeah, somebody who cares about, you know, being organized and who cares about building relationships.
Awesome. Lisa, what do you think?
I would definitely agree with Megan on the organized piece. All about that. That's where it really helped me kind of make the jump from support. But I would also add, like for myself or my own experience, embracing new challenges. There's a lot of things that come up where it's going to be really hard and you're not going to know the answer, and you're going to have to be able to figure that out. And a lot of that is working cross-functionally. And then also just like passionate about empowering others. Like Jonas said, like seeing other people succeed based off of the work that you do, it's such like a gratifying experience. And it's sometimes, I guess for us, if you're in enablement, it feels a little bit I don't know the word here, the perfect word here, but it just feels very gratifying to see that experience and see how your impact.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I can imagine that's why a lot of people want to get into it. Jonas, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, I'd say like, I think self-awareness. So like moving from BDR into revenue enablement, definitely like self-awareness is a huge key. So just like being really, really hyper aware of like your own gaps, but also not getting obsessed with gaps. I think we should always be like invested in how do I fill in things that maybe I'm not so good at, but you should absolutely be focusing more on your strengths and how do you develop those. I think the second piece that's helped with the transition has just been like empathy in general. You have in enablement, like you need to have a super intense like curiosity to like work with each role, understand their pains, understand how to democratize best practices. And that only comes from like really being good at putting yourself in the shoes as them. Yeah.
A lot of empathy required. And what was kind of the turning point for each of you? I think each of you kind of touched on it, but just to crystallize it a little bit more, what was that turning point that made you sure you wanted to do this? Like move from your role, go into enablement. Lisa, I think I remember you saying something about this when we talked before the webinar, but I'm curious how you kind of sum that up.
The organizational gaps piece. I guess for me, like I've worked at a lot of startups where like enablement is very piecemealed. So just kind of identifying the gaps and working from there.
Yeah, that's a good one. What about you, Jonas?
Yeah, I think team success. I love seeing people get better at something that maybe they didn't think that they could get better at, or seeing an entire team rally around like a common vision or a common mission, and then meet those goals. Like that, it really fires you up when it's like not just your own goals and individual ambitions, but when you're doing it with like, 4 or 5, 10, 150 people alongside of you. That's really cool.
Awesome. How about you, Megan?
I think I just saw it as a great opportunity to learn a ton, learn something new, and contribute to Intercom in a different way, and also be able to drive impact. So having been a sales rep, I knew what I wanted onboarding to look like, and I was excited to hopefully kind of like leave my mark on that.
Awesome. And kind of one last closing question for this kind of intro section. I'm curious, now that you guys have built out these programs and how to handle a lot of different parts of enablement, training, learning, support, how would you define enablement? What does that mean to you? Let's go Jonas, Megan, then Lisa.
Sweet. Yeah, I think it depends on the org. I think it's important to start with that. I think every org is in like different stages of like maturity when it comes to their enablement program. For me, I think at the end of the day, like enablement is helping people be successful. And I think that really should be aligned with like company initiatives, right? So like overarching company goals, how are we tactfully, actually working with other functions, rallying managers, rallying ICs, all to meet those goals? And are you building a program, putting something in place to help us get from that point A to point B? So that's kind of what I'd say enablement is to me today. That may change. I don't know. I think it depends.
Awesome.
Yeah, to Jonas's point, sales enablement is just evolving. We wear so many hats and there's so much that we do, like leading, trainings on our sales methodology or new product and feature launches and, all sorts of things, onboarding. But I think at the root of it is really just being an empathetic partner to the sales org. Being a sales rep is really difficult. Being a sales manager is really difficult. And being a director of sales is really difficult. So making sure we can make their jobs as smooth and easy as possible.
Much appreciated.
And for me, it's like empowering others with the tools and resources for them to do their jobs successfully, hopefully with limited friction.
Good. Yeah, hopefully limited. Awesome. Those are great answers. Let's kind of move into our next section here. I want to dive more into how you guys were able to actually carve out your roles, make your mark here in the enablement programs that you're running today. First question, in terms of learnings, tactics, things that you built, what actually elevated you to a true educator and enablement role from your role as a rep? What were some of the things you were doing there? Lisa, I'll start with you.
I pretty much built a knowledge base at every company I worked at in some capacity, whether that was like an external or internal team specific. And that's really what kicked off a lot of my interest, but a lot of that natural progression.
Good. So like a great mix of natural need, stepping up, filling the gap, realizing that you loved it and wanted to do more of it. Megan, how about you? What things did you take on?
I basically built out a brand new onboarding program from scratch. We had a decent like e-learning in place beforehand, but I really wanted to make sure we were also incorporating live sessions. So that was a big part of the onboarding overhaul that I worked on. And then my director of enablement pretty much said, hey, I want to get you in front of the room leading biweekly trainings for our reps, many of which are much more tenured than I am, some of our enterprise reps. And that was scary, but a huge like growth opportunity for me, and I've learned a ton. So I feel like that's when I really started feeling a little bit more comfortable in the role.
Great. And Jonas, how about you?
Yeah, so I think, previous to enablement was doing a lot of like enablement activities, but I think the function itself is entirely different than just doing enablement activities. I'd say like what really elevated me when I first transitioned to enablement, and it was thanks to I had a manager who really championed for me. I had a director, people, higher up that were championing for me to move to enablement. I'm super lucky for. I got the ability to work with onboarding, like Megan. We completely overhauled like a non-existent onboarding program and built one out for all of our revenue roles. We did our first ever revenue kickoff, which was super exciting and super fun, pre-COVID, obviously. But I feel what's really like helped me get to like where I am today, I think it's just surrounding yourself by like the best of the best, people that advocate for you, people that are really, really good at what they do, whether it's enablement, whether it's sales management, you're only as good as your stakeholders. And that's been super helpful for me.
Awesome. Here's a $1 million question for the three of you. If you could go back to the beginning of your role, what would you do differently? Let's go ahead and go around the horn. Megan, then Jonas, then Lisa here.
There are so many things, but for the sake of time, the one thing that I would probably say is not trying to boil the ocean. And this is something I'm still really working on personally, but making sure that my longer term goals, I can break those down into bite-sized weekly chunks so that I don't get overwhelmed.
That's rich. I feel for me, it's going to sound so nerdy, but like more decision matrices, like more finding ways to like really prioritize like what matters in the very moment. I think my biggest issue when I first moved to enablement was like this hero complex. You want to fix everything. You want to help everybody. And at the end of the day, like you need to align, like you only have so much bandwidth, you and your team, and you need to align, what are the quick wins, what's going to have the biggest impact, less effort, or, what aligns with your OKRs, things like that. And if I could go back in time, I would have done that better.
Good advice. So I think the prioritization helps so we aren't trying to boil the ocean then, right? So these are very connected answers. Lisa, how about you?
To not repeat it, because I do agree, that's definitely something I would go back and do. I would also work very closely with an executive sponsor.
Cool. That's a segue into my next thought here. So one thing I actually see as being super similar between your roles and my role in sales is we need a lot of cross-functional collaboration to make our brand of change management happen, right? So when I'm trying to get a deal across the finish line, that represents a lot of change management for the customer often. When we're trying to roll out a really great implementation with them, it represents a lot of change management as well. And that means there needs to be so many stakeholder groups and executive sponsorship aligned on our side to get contracts finalized, aligned on the customer side to get this change rolled out. I know one of the things that learning lessons I took away from working with one of our larger clients, Disney, was when we actually rolled out WorkRamp there, we decided to roll it out to managers a full 2 months prior to rolling it out to anyone else, because we wanted the managers to be so bought in on this enablement system to make sure it would trickle down appropriately and that they'd be able to get their sales reps to actually use it. And so that's kind of a learning I had that reminds me a lot, Lisa, of what you mentioned about working closely with executive sponsorship. What have you guys learned about the importance of getting buy-in here, cross-functional collaboration, delegation, kind of managing priorities across teams? Any key learnings you want to share here? Let's go with Megan first.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I truly believe that sales enablement and training, nothing would happen unless we had our sales managers and sales leadership on board. So I'm really intentional about always having really open channels of communication. So I have a monthly standing meeting with our managers and directors of each different region, just so they know, like, I'm there to listen to them. I want to partner with them. And secondly, if there's a large initiative that I'm working on, I need to make sure that I have their buy-in from the get-go. So what that looks like is, for example, our schedule for biweekly trainings for any given quarter. I will come to them with my thoughts, my ideas, and a couple different options of plans. And then they can, provide their feedback, make tweaks where they want. But I think the key part there is not going to them and just asking them point blank what they want to see, but presenting them with options. So you're not making them do the heavy lifting.
Yes, I'm sure that very much speeds up the process for people to get aligned. Cool. Lisa, do you want to add something to that? And then we'll let Jonas take the tail end here.
Yes, I'm definitely working with your executive sponsor, getting buy-in from all the stakeholders. One of the benefits that I've noticed out of that buy-in phase is that there's sometimes an offer for that help. And then being able to be like, okay, now I know really like what kind of timelines I can work with. Yeah, that's like the bulk of it, just working with those two groups and make sure everyone is fully aligned and aligned to like the business outcomes that you're trying to achieve.
I mean, I think, yeah, Megan and Lisa nailed it. I'd say, like, this is going to sound so lame, but I love like the sales methodology of MedPick. And I think it's basically applying that to like what we do as, enablement professionals. So, if I has identified pain, and that's like, hey, what happens if we don't solve what's going on today? Like what's the loss in rep productivity or whatever? While M being metrics is, if we implement said enablement program, like what is the potential uptick? What is the potential benefit of that? And I think like that's a good place to start, when it comes to like, hey, have a metric in mind that you want to improve with your enablement program. And then from there, like you're combining qualitative like interviews with like the field, with reps, you identify that pain, have that metric in mind that we want to improve, find your champion, like Lisa and Megan said, and then implement the program. And it's always good to have that metric in mind as your like North Star.
Yes, you are speaking my language here, by the way. I knew our jobs are similar. Awesome. We're enabling our customers, right? Hopefully, right? The same way you guys are enabling internal employees. That's great. Okay, so another question I had was, of course, there's not a one size fits all here, but what would you say are specific projects that you can take on that have immediate value for an org right when you start in a sales enablement role? Like the first time a team rolls out enablement, what are the must-have kind of high impact, quickest win type of projects? Let's go Lisa, Jonas, Megan.
Do you think it depends on your org and the maturity of your org, like Jonas said earlier? But for me, the most common has been that knowledge base. So having documentation, but more importantly, like it's not just the documentation being there, it's where can they access it? Do they get it when they actually need it the most?
Yeah, I think for us, one of the quickest wins was just determining like what is good, baselining like what's good, what does a good rep look like, what does a good onboarding program look like, and then from there you kind of reverse engineer that and try to democratize whether it's best practices, whether it's what is good, to help other people get there. So I think that's probably like one of the quickest wins. I mean, for us, we didn't have onboarding, so quickest win was, okay, we need to probably do onboarding. Yeah.
Awesome.
I would say it totally depends on your company, but I think what's so critical to do in the first couple weeks is just spend time talking to sales directors, sales managers, and reps. You're probably going to hear common themes about what's going well, what's not going well. And the things that aren't going well, I think it's helpful to prioritize things in a list of what are the easiest things to do that are going to drive the highest impact, down to what are the hardest things, most time consuming to do that aren't going to drive as much impact, and kind of working your way down.
Awesome.
And just like building relationships in general, making sure your sales leadership knows that you're there to support them and partner with them and not get in their way.
Awesome. Great advice from you guys. I have a really important question up next. So this is something I think about a lot in my role. How do you measure ROI from your sales enablement initiatives? Let's go ahead and everyone can take this one. Jonas, Megan, Lisa, in that order.
Sweet. Yeah, and we keep talking about, like, it depends, I think, on the stage that your org is in, the stage that your enablement team is in. I mean, it's really a maturity model, right? Lower level of the maturity model, you're going to be very reactive as an enablement org. So you're going to be prioritizing quick wins. You're going to have a lot of incoming requests when it comes to content building, when it comes to onboarding, when it comes to, easy kind of like low lift, heavy impact types of programs. But I think it's moving up that maturity model that's really difficult. So getting to like becoming very metric driven, very proactive, where we're trying to identify pains before they become org-wide pains, right? Before they implode on themselves. So I think that's like, so measuring ROI, it depends. I think at the end of the day, like I always get very skeptical when I read like state of sales enablement reports, like onboarding programs reduce ramp by 20%, because it's like, okay, well, like what is ramp to you? What is ramp to your org? I think it's hard to like draw that correlation when there's so many different teams and so many different variables involved in onboarding. So I think at the end of the day, like for us, the way we've been measuring ROI is finding what's the biggest priority to the execs, what's the biggest priority to company OKRs, and we align our programs with that. And if we're improving those metrics, those sub bullet points of the OKRs, we're doing something right.
Awesome. I love what you said about being proactive versus reactive. I'm always thinking about leading indicators versus lagging indicators. Like whenever possible, we want to identify those. Oh, by the way, we got a question from the audience from Tom Brady. Oh, very cool to see him plugging into one of my webinars. Tom Brady, we will get to your question just after this one. Megan, why don't you go ahead and take the question about ROI, and then we'll turn it to Lisa.
Well, now I'm nervous because Tom Brady's on the webinar. But I would say it's important to make sure, how quickly can we get a new sales rep feeling comfortable on the phone, feeling comfortable demoing. So from an onboarding side, that is probably the most important thing in terms of ROI. And of course, too, I send out surveys after a new hire completes their onboarding so that we can continually improve it. And I do the same thing with our sales trainings. We send out surveys to, make sure that they're as impactful as possible. And we take attendance too. Our sales managers are really interested in seeing that data. But in terms of specific ROI, I think sales enablement is a hard one. I think at the end of the day, it's really just, are our stakeholders happy with us and what we're doing? So is sales leadership happy? Is our VP sales happy? That's all that really matters to us at the end of the day.
Cool.
For me, so I actually look at both the internal and external enablement. So we do a lot of customer training, also like our help centers, all of our documentation there. So when I'm looking at all of it, I'm looking at adoption, I'm looking at reduction in costs. So how much time are we spending training customers, but also how much are we spending internally training to get people ramped up? And I agree, at the end of the day, like, are your stakeholders happy? Do they have what they need? And kind of like filling in that gap.
Awesome. Great answers. Okay, for the Q&A question, to sum it up, curious, what is in your tech stack today that you use to help enable you to run these enablement programs?
Okay, in this vendor neutral, I mean, am I allowed to like list out vendors? I'll just say general like tech stack stuff. Well, we use WorkRamp, and WorkRamp's pretty great. We like them enough that I'm here today. we love it, in fact. But yeah, in regards to tech stack, I think it's super important to have obviously something for onboarding. So something to actually produce that content. Obviously, a way to share external collateral with prospects. I think that's super important. And then obviously, depending on the org, enablement, in our case, we work really closely with PMM. So you want to be able to partner with PMM on like being that glue between like, oh, like what collateral resonates with prospects, what collateral is being shared the most by sales. And then from there, you're able to give that sales feedback to PMM, act as that direct channel to then optimize and let that influence your content strategy internally and externally.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
How about you?
For me, we use WorkRent for both internal and external. So we're using the academies piece for our customers. And then in addition to that, for documentation externally, we have README because we love our APIs and we need a good API documentation tool. And then we use Guru for our sales team. So that's kind of like the short stack version of all the tools that we're using.
Awesome. Megan, what are your go-tos?
Just like Lisa's team, we also use Guru for all of our internal documentation for both our sales and support teams. I live in WorkRamp every day. I'm a big WorkRamp user. So all of our new sales hires, no matter what team they're on, what office they're in, they use WorkRamp to get onboarded. And we use Gong for call recordings. And I'm sure I'm leaving out a ton more, but those are the ones that come to mind.
A lot of enablement tools out there. One more quick question for the audience before we move into kind of general highlights, learnings from the job. Curious to hear if it seems like a higher impact to you guys to focus on people or process initiatives. How do you balance the two? What do you feel gives you the higher impact? I know it might be case by case or dependent on the org, but maybe let's hear Megan, Lisa, Jonas in that order.
That's a hard question. I think the people part of it is the most crucial, in my opinion. Luckily, I have amazing teammates who really have nailed a lot of the processes before I even joined the team. So that has made my life a lot easier. And they kind of manage all the documentation and Guru. They're like superheroes. But yeah, so on my end, I have a lot more bandwidth, I think, to really focus on the relationship building aspect of it.
I would completely agree with Megan. At the end of the day, I'm trying to make sure my stakeholders are also happy and they have what they need. So people has been the biggest driver.
Awesome.
I'm actually going to differ from the rest of the panel. I think process is super important. And I think the reason for that, like, well, we're super into like people, like what produces good people? How do you define like what good is, what a good person, what a good rep is in any role? Like you need, I think at the end of the day, I think we're all aligned that like we love people and we're obsessed with empathy. We're obsessed with everyone succeeding. How do we democratize success? But there do need to be really, really good processes in place to ensure that that's predictable, that it's scalable, that it's repeatable. But again, at the end of the day, like process is only as good as its people. So if you're not like leveraging those relationships with managers to, you know, enforce and uphold these processes, if you're not working closely, you know, for our org, we're umbrellaed under sales excellence with sales ops. So it's a huge advantage for us to kind of use them on that process piece, and we get to focus a little bit more on people. But I think the two work really well in tandem. It's a weird line. It's a weird seesaw balance.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. I mean, clearly they're both important. I'd say everyone sold me on their particular answer in this round. So hopefully that was helpful to Robin, who asked from the audience. Let's move into the next section. I want to dive in more to your current role. So highlights, challenges, learnings, things that surprised you. Let's save the best for first. What do you love the most about enablement? Let's go Megan, Jonas, Lisa.
I think two things. One, this is very a very personal answer, but I'm kind of like a personal finance geek. So I was really into the steady income of having a sales enablement role versus being an account executive where half of your pay every quarter is kind of a big question mark. So that's something I love about my role today. But more importantly, I love the relationship building aspect of it. Getting to meet all of our new hires and work with them is so much fun. It just makes me happy. And lastly too, I am half extrovert, half introvert. And I feel like sales enablement and training is perfect for that, because I do get to engage a lot with our sales reps and lead trainings, but I also do get a lot of time to myself where I can just be heads down, not talking to anyone and working on my projects like onboarding.
I can see that. Awesome. What about Jonas? You're up.
Yeah, when it's kind of funny. It's something we do at onboarding. When people join, we're like, all right, pitch Algolia to your like grandma or your parents. And I feel like I'm doing that a lot with enablement. I'm explaining to my parents what I do. And it's just so difficult. So I usually just tell them, kind of a therapist sometimes I'm a politician, sometimes I'm a strategist, I'm a trainer. You get to wear a lot of different hats in enablement, like kind of what we've all talked about today. I think the really interesting thing about it, like what I love about it, is that you just get exposed to so many different teams, so many different parts of the business that, when I was in biz dev, I had no idea these things were happening behind the scenes. And it's super good insights if you want to learn like how a company scales from the ground up.
Great. I love that, wearing lots of hats, getting to support people in a lot of different ways. Lisa, what do you think?
I love empowering people, but more importantly, I love empowering people to self-serve. So I love like on-demand trainings. I love people that have access to documentation, especially right now with everyone working from home, having access without having to I can't poke someone. I can't just like turn over to my neighbor and ask a question on like how to go through a process. All that stuff is just completely available, and being able to like provide that system and make improvements on it is something that I just love.
Awesome. Great answers, guys. On the flip side of that coin, what are some challenges that you face in the sales enablement role? Maybe the ones, I know there's probably been several throughout the time you've been in the role, but maybe the biggest challenges you're each facing today. Let's go with Lisa, Jonas, then Megan.
Managing like competing priorities and resources. So sometimes like the same person that I need to use for one of my projects is also being tied over to another high priority project. And then sometimes there's just that lack of alignment at the top. So really having to then figure out, okay, what can we do and what's the correct timeline for these things?
I know I've already nerded out a little bit about decision matrices, but one thing that challenge, right, is just like prioritization, and then like having a consistent like methodology for how you prioritize programs and incoming things, needs, pains, whatever. We currently today we use like the Eisenhower matrix. So we're literally looking at like, okay, like what programs are the most urgent, and then what programs are the most important. And obviously you weigh that by comparing that to company OKRs, comparing that to other metrics that matter. So that's been like what we've been doing today. It's a huge challenge to be super specific. I think another challenge that recently came up was just with feedback. So how do you like iterate quickly on feedback? And I think sometimes it's really easy, specifically with onboarding, to just pull the trigger on feedback. You get all this awesome feedback and then you're like, cool, I'm going to change all of this right now and I can't wait for the next batch. That's not necessarily a good thing, because there needs, like, you need to control as many variables as you can in onboarding, and you need to onboard 10 classes, 10, 15, 20 people before you start making changes. Otherwise you might make a change and not exactly know what caused what. When you lose control of your experiment, that's never really a good thing.
I would agree completely with Lisa and Jonas on the competing priorities piece. I think that's the nature of sales enablement, and it will probably always be that way. Something I've always had a hard time with being in my role is at Intercom, we have an incredible product team, and they ship new features, new products all the time. Our product is always evolving, and it's incredible, but it makes it really difficult to constantly be updating our onboarding and make sure that it's fresh for all of our new reps. So that's probably my biggest challenge.
Cool. Question from the audience just came in actually. maybe we can slot it in right here. If you had all the time in the world to work on one extracurricular project for sales enablement, what would it be? Let's have everyone kind of go through that one. Let's do Lisa, Megan, Jonas.
Well, for me, so I guess like a little insight into what I'm doing right now and creating like an ecosystem of where all this knowledge is, how do people get access to it, and also like ultimately when do they need it most. And I'm also doing that on the external side. So really like without product limitations for all the tools that we use, I would want to like perfect that ecosystem.
I would say right now I just took WorkRamp's instructional design course on how to make your e-learnings as effective as possible. And I learned so much. So right now I'm working on making sure that our onboarding experience in WorkRamp is as fun as you can possibly make it. So there's never enough time in the day to perfect that and get it to where I want it to be, but that's something I'm currently working on. And something that's also super top of mind for me right now is trying to get as many great call examples in Gong as possible so that we can share with new hires. It's a bit hard to organize because there are so many calls that happen every day, but top of mind for me.
Yeah, you're trying to empty the bucket and someone's pouring into it at the same time.
Yeah.
All right, Jonas, what about you?
Yeah, I think, two extracurricular things that I'm like really investing in right now in regards to enablement is just shadowing more like sales calls and sales cycles. I think, I wasn't a closer prior, and getting that insight is so key to like doing what I'm doing today. It's been super helpful, and you get to look at it from like the lens of an enablement person, not necessarily a closer. And I think that makes it even all the more powerful. So that's been really fun extracurricularly. And then the other thing would be just getting more well-versed in like instructional design. You can produce really great content, you can produce really great programs, but if you're not creating something that you don't know how to design and or measure how people are retaining knowledge, is the field retaining what you're sharing with them, then you're always ways to be more effective. And so that's been super helpful for me as well.
Totally.
Yeah.
I have one more question for you, and then afterwards we'll take Stephanie's question from the chat here, because I think it's a good one to kind of put towards closer to the end here. My question in the meantime is how you all came from support, account executive, and enterprise BDR roles specifically, right? Yet you're training these go-to-market teams where you're helping to train some of the roles that you have never done personally. What's the best way to go about doing that? And I'm half asking because I have to do that today in my job. And I just want to know any tips you guys have. How do you train someone on a role that you haven't personally been in for 5 years yourself?
Absolutely. So yeah, I can.
Yeah, sorry, go for it, Jonas.
You want me to? Okay, cool. Yeah, I think.
Call it out. I forgot to that time.
No, it's super interesting because like so right now I'm like lucky I'm in revenue enablement, and so like we're support SAs, SEs, CSMs, renewal, like the whole shebang, right? Which is like really cool because you learn how interconnected revenue is. And I'm actually biased to, I think like revenue, like we all should be really aligned. We all should be working really closely together because go to market, for example, it's not just a sales thing. It still applies to like customer success, but that's a rant neither here nor there. When it comes to actually training these roles that I've never done before, it takes an insane amount of curiosity, an insane amount like what I'm doing now. I'm shadowing sales calls. I'm trying to shadow every role end to end to really get a good understanding of like objectively, I'm not in their role, but I, as an enablement professional, a little bit more like a doctor, I can prescribe solutions, or I can identify a pain, diagnose a pain, but like what good is it if you diagnose a pain without prescribing a solution? So I think you get this really cool ability to do that. At the end of the day, like you're not alone. I think that's like the last, bit of advice there. I'm only as good as like my other enablement counterparts. I'm only as good as the managers I work with. And so like if there's a gap that I have, like you lean on other people to fill those in for you. Focus on what you're really good at. And, when you're all working together, like it ends up working out.
Love that. I love the doctor analogy. Cool. Megan, we'll let you take it next.
I'm super reliant on our subject matter experts, our SMEs. So whether that's, people from our pricing and packaging team or our product marketing team, if we are rolling out a new feature, I really lean on them to help facilitate trainings. And as well as sales reps too. For example, when we want to train our new reps on pricing, I'll often pull in one of our senior relationship managers who talks about pricing with customers all the time. And there's just no way that I could possibly know pricing as deeply as one of our senior reps, just because it's not the world that I'm living in every day. And also too, just owning up to it when you don't know the answer to something goes so far. I lead trainings all the time where questions will be asked to me that I don't know the answer to, and I'll just say I don't know the answer and open it up to the team, and usually it starts a great dialogue. So at the end of the day, like, we can't be experts on everything, and I think people understand that.
Totally. I think that humility of admitting when, hey, I don't know, I need to do a little bit more research, or maybe crowdsource from you all. What do you think? That goes a long way in terms of earning respect from sales. So I appreciate enablement professionals who are like that. What about you, Lisa? What's your take on?
Yeah. So for me, like, identifying the business outcomes that you're trying to achieve, which ultimately helps with, like, what are you then trying to accomplish with the training? But ultimately, I partner with SMEs. Like, I don't actually rely on my own knowledge. I don't train. I completely work with them, kind of give them frameworks and guidelines, and that kind of helps them also learn more about enablement, but ultimately then kind of empowering everyone else.
Awesome. Great. I love this. It's the vibe I'm getting from you all is you can't know everything, but you don't need to do this job really, really well. So it's great to hear. We have a question from the audience that I think is a really good one to kind of wrap up this section with, and then we'll move into one round of bonus question. So this is from Stephanie Kim. She asked, enablement is still fairly a new department in the tech world. How do you envision the career path for someone starting off? And how do you think the performance should be measured for someone in enablement? And let's go with Lisa first, then Megan, then Jonas.
I think this always depends on, like, the maturity of your organization and enablement there. But there's so many ways that someone can go from enablement elsewhere. There's times where I'm like, wow, I'm a product manager, and I could easily kind of go back into an ops role if I wanted to, like, make another career transition. For myself, the way that I would like to progress in my career is just continuing on the path of taking on more challenges, working with more people, working on larger scale projects, and just continuously expanding and scaling enablement. As far as, like, performance being measured, especially when you first get started, like, are you meeting these success metrics that your organization needs from you? Are those tied and, like, helping the business achieve their KPIs? So.
Awesome. Yeah, I imagine the role is so cross-functional you could almost go any which you wanted. Cool. What about you, Megan?
Yeah, I think because sales enablement is a newer function, there are just so many different things that you could specialize in. To Lisa's point, you could be more of a product marketer, or you could be really focused on the knowledge base and documentation upkeep, kind of like that's part of Lisa's role. Myself, I'm a big trainer. I'm leading trainings for our global team most of the time. And then there's the onboarding portion of it. So there are so many different things that you can find within sales enablement. And I feel like you could go a lot of different directions in your career. I totally wouldn't rule out for myself ever maybe going back and being a sales rep again. I wouldn't take that off the table. And I think in terms of measuring a successful sales enablement person, just being willing to take on new projects and take risks and just try things out. No one's expecting perfection, and yeah, just being, like, bold with it.
Yeah, it's iterative, of course. Cool. Jonas, what do you think about this one?
Yeah, I think enablement's at this, like, really cool inflection point where I think it's going to really pop off. Maybe I'm biased because I'm in it, but I mean, look at COVID, like where we are today. We're all remote. workplace, the way workforces scale is changing. It's evolving. And so like enablement's a super important function to come in there. I think there's huge potential and opportunity there. I think we just look at the sheer amount of content out there in the world. Like there's literally people that are becoming content curators, right? I think it's the same thing with enablement. Like more orgs are hyper growth, and you need somebody that specializes in delivering programs at scale. So what does a career path look like? I have no clue where my career is going to go after this. I want to stay in enablement. I love enablement. I think it depends. Seems to be a trend with the answers, but there's a lot of different pockets of enablement. And I think as enablement becomes a more popular function, people are going to become more niche in different pockets of enablement. So you have onboarding, for example. I think that's its own niche. That's its own beast. You have program management. Could be a lot of different things, but you'll see like enablement program managers at different companies, and depending on the product line of the SaaS company, they'll focus on different products. We can have, I think, more, what I'd like to see is more enablement professionals pop up around like career development and career frameworks. I think about, I'm biased. I was once an SDR, BDR. I think SDR, BDRs, early hires, entry-level jobs are one of the best talent pools out there today. How do we develop somebody from being a really, really good BDR into something else really amazing in their org? And I hope more enablement pops up there. When it comes to measuring performance, and I'll wrap up. I think it's tough. It's going to depend. Early stage, like when you're onboarding, or when you're starting enablement, it's like, how much content am I producing? Like that's the biggest thing you're looking at. How many onboarding modules have I produced? How many people have we onboarded? But obviously, as time goes on, you're looking to find baselines of like, how do we, increase revenue, lower cost of sale, and then take a step back. Well, what do we do in onboarding to optimize that, to improve that metric? If that's like the biggest metric under the microscope of focus.
To Jonas's point, enablement may be new, but it's the reason that we're all employed and successful, myself included, because I work at an enablement platform, right? And if I felt before, I fully believed in what you guys do and what sales enablement does. I fully believed in working before COVID. I believe in it now more than ever, right? To Jonas's point, the world is moving to remote training. I actually work remote and finally just moved to a new city outside of San Francisco for that reason. So I think the world is trending in this direction. And so to segue into my bonus question, if you guys have one tip from each of you for nailing sales enablement during the pandemic, during the remote work world, let's go with Lisa, Megan, Jonas.
Creating tools and systems where everyone can also access but share their knowledge.
Cool.
Being really empathetic and compassionate. This has been a hard year for everyone. So if somebody doesn't have the headspace for an onboarding training on a given day, I'm not going to make them sit through it, and wanting them to be as transparent with me if they're kind of up for it that day. We can always reschedule, and really making sure all of our new hires who are starting remotely and not getting to meet anyone face to face, I hope that they know that we're not expecting perfection from them right away. Their managers are not expecting perfection from them. So just really being compassionate.
I think, the only thing really for me to add, I think, is we've recently been trying to get better about how do we create an experience? How do we create learner experiences at scale? Really the only way you can do that is by understanding what motivates your learners, what matters most to them. It's impossible to, I guess, personalize everybody's learning curriculum at scale, to be completely honest, but how do you do that as much as you can? Especially with us being remote, like everyone said, we're separated from one another. You want to feel a part of something. You want to be engaged. Death by PowerPoint's never a good thing. So that's something that we've been trying to do, is create experiences, and it's been very beneficial in a ton of different ways.
Awesome, great tip. Hopefully that was helpful to everybody. despite me freezing. I don't know if anything I said was caught, but I think it's more important that people heard your responses. So thank you for the COVID tips in this weird 2020 world we live in. And I want to just thank everyone for joining today. I hope you took a ton of great ideas away from our panelists here, Jonas, Lisa, Megan. Thank you so much for being on here today. Feel free to connect with any of us on LinkedIn. I'm sure I speak for these guys here when I say we love geeking out about all things enablement. So yeah, to just wrap up, have a great day, everybody on here, and until next time.